Welcome to today's episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. So today I'm joined by Becca and Oscar. Welcome, Becca and Oscar.
Hi.
Hi.
And we've got a really good topic today. So today we're talking about the top 5 mistakes you can make in your messaging. So I think this is really important. Well, actually, I'm going to ask you guys why this is really important. So Becca, why is messaging so important for companies and why should they really listen to the end of this podcast?
So messaging is basically the foundation of all of your marketing, your branding, any communications with your company, with your customers starts with messaging. And if you haven't got that right, you're sort of building a house on a bad foundation. So it's really important, I think, to talk about what people are doing right and wrong so that they don't make those mistakes.
So there's a lot of things that we see which companies do that actually, if they did differently, they could really quickly optimize their engagement on their website, their engagement through their sales materials. If we go through 1 to 5 and probably in order of pretty much importance, Becca, what would you say is one of the number one things?
Oh, very easily here, it's not being simple enough.
Yeah.
I think, with messaging, somebody has to do the thinking. Either the person that creates it has to think about the message and think about what they're saying, or the person that's reading it. And nobody has time to work out what you're trying to say. So you kind of need to do that legwork as the marketer, as the company, of making your message so simple and easy that they don't have to think about what you're trying to say. You've got to put the work in for your customer, basically.
So can you give any examples of what that could look like? Because I think it's very easy to say messaging should be really simple. Like can you give an example of what that could look like or how people should think about it? Like if you've got really clear messaging, this is what you'll find or something like that.
Yeah, so I think, because it's really hard to know what clear messaging is unless you know what it is, I guess. But it's so that your customer should know what you do, how you get it from them, and how it benefits them immediately. So, for example, I'll use ours, for example. So our tagline is accurate medical device marketing without the micromanagement. So you know that you're getting accurate medical device marketing help without you having to stand over and watch us because we know what we're doing. So as soon as you land on our website, you know what we do and how we help you. And then right underneath that is a book a 30-minute call button. So without even having to think, you know what we do, how it helps you don't have to micromanage, and how you get it within 30 seconds. And that's clear messaging. If we started talking about the fact that we do animation, social media, websites, filming, everything that we do, if we threw all of that at you at once, immediately you're going to be like, whoa, that is way too much. And even though when we were writing our messaging, we wanted to put all those things in there, it's not what actually matters. You need to be really clear and to the point about what you're getting from them.
So when you're talking about simple, it's also about being really, really, really specific so that somebody can picture what it is you do without burning any calories in their brain.
Exactly that. I think the burning the calories or saving the time is a really big thing. You're doing that work. You're the one that's sitting there for hours being like, I want to say this, but I also want to say this. How do I get that to be concise? That you're doing all of that so that when people land on your website, they're not having to unpick what you're trying to say because in reality, they're not going to do that. So you do that, you put the effort in because it is difficult to simplify your message because you want to say everything because it is all really important to you. So the important thing is making sure that you're picking the bit that is simple and important to your customer. It takes time, but it's so worthwhile doing. Because you just have a better interaction with your customer because they know who you are, what you do, and how you help them straight away.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So specificity is really important so that people can really picture what it is you do by keeping it really, really simple.
Yes.
So what's one of the other mistakes that people make, Oscar? I know that one thing that we see actually in messaging is really fun. How creative can you be? Where do people go wrong when they start thinking about creativity?
Yeah, for sure. I think they get the sequencing wrong for me. I think they focus on the end product of what their messaging is going to look like, trying to be fancy with their words and trying to come up with the perfect phrasing before they've even understood their own story or their own product or their own offering. And I think, look, we all want to deliver that amazing piece of work. We want to get the accolades from our colleagues, from our clients, from our customers. We want the pat on the back. And we don't often want to put in the hard work to fully understand what's at the essence of your messaging.
Or maybe people don't understand the amount of work that actually goes in.
So I think that's probably a better way to say it, actually. Like people think the fancy, perfect choice of word is the hard part. I'd say actually that's probably one of the easier parts once you've done the hard, heavy lifting, cognitively of actually understanding, getting to the essence of what your core message is. If you spend 90% of your effort and time and brain power there, then the final 10% of just tweaking it to make it sound amazing and customer or client facing, that's better. And I think, it's sometimes you can feel a bit like an imposter spending so long looking at the simple, plain English.
Simple is hard. Simple is really difficult.
So, and I think back to kind of what Becca's saying about the simplicity, like clarity is king here. It's the understated, backbone of messaging. And really, if you nail that and get that right, I'm not saying don't go away and be a fancy flash genius. I'm just saying make sure you get the sequencing right and focus on the simple first, focus on the clarity first, and then move on to putting the little sprinkly flares of creativity on top.
And actually, Becca, we spoke earlier about this, and you came up with a really great example, which is the Nike Just Do It.
Yes.
And everybody looks at it, and probably people look at the Apple branding as well. That's always examples that come up. But it's like, actually, there's a whole lot behind that. So
there's a whole story behind that. And it is a very simple message, just do it. And that tagline probably took ages, because there's a whole story. Like, we all know Nike's story is about just put the trainers on and go, just do it. No matter, and they have so many campaigns about that. And that story would have come before that tagline, because if you're trying to make it go the other way, it's just not authentic. So creating a really great story about just getting out and going places and putting the hard work in, having that story, and then being like, right, how do I simplify this into a really concise, powerful tagline? Just do it is how it should be done. And I think people spend so long focusing on the fancy tagline that they kind of forget what they're trying to say.
Well, just get that right first. Get the story right first.
Get the story right first, because your tagline can be tweaked. You can make your website copy stronger, but the story needs to stay the same. And if you get the story right, everything else kind of falls in place. Maybe not right away, but over time, it does fall in place.
It does, because if you have your story right as well, it means you take each part of the story and you start elaborating on that part of the story. But if you don't have that story and you just have the tagline, you don't have the foundations, and then it just crumbles away underneath you. So it's not authentic, actually, which we said loads of times in this podcast before, like trustworthy, authentic, things like that. Okay, so another problem, and this is a big problem we see, Becky, I'm nodding your head there.
I know what the third problem is.
So the third problem, and we are probably guilty of this sometimes ourselves as well. I think everybody is guilty of it. And it's, Becca, what is it?
The curse of knowledge.
Yes, what is the curse of knowledge?
So I think the curse of knowledge is so rife in medical device, but it's everywhere as well.
Everywhere,
but in medical device, I see it all the time. And basically, your product, or we know with Podymos, are better than anybody else. We live and we breathe it every single day. So our knowledge is out of 10. And we naturally know that we know the most, so that we simplify maybe to a 4 or a 5 or a 6 because we think we've simplified it enough. But in reality, people make buying decisions at a 1 or a 2. And that gap between 2 and 5 or 2 and 6 is the curse of knowledge. It's assuming that people know what you're talking about and they're following you. And I see this in medical device a lot, when you're throwing in jargon or you're putting in acronyms that you do not explain anywhere, and just think, oh, our doctors will know what that means. But do they? Do they really? Or have you based that off maybe your KOLs, or, you've based it off a really small proportion of your audience, where in reality, everybody else does need you to explain that in more detail and does need you to simplify it. So I think the curse of knowledge is something that we see everywhere. And I constantly talk about it with the team here, and I question it, like, are we doing the curse of knowledge here? And it's something that, Oscar, you probably hear me say this about once or twice a week. I'm constantly being like, are we being simple, or are we assuming things? The curse of knowledge is something that you always have to pull yourself up on, because even when you have the story down, you might be doing a different marketing piece or a video or just some sort of marketing collateral, and the curse of knowledge can sneak in. So it's something that you've got to constantly be aware of.
And something that you do a lot that I quite like to combat this is constantly, if we've been working on a project together and we're so stuck in it and we think we've simplified it to the maximum that we can, you'll quite often bring in a team member that hasn't been working on that project and ask them to run through it, and they'll 9 times out of 10 they'll point out something that just doesn't make sense to them, and we realized yet again, shock, horror, we've been fallen prey to it. So that's the one tip I think that I've learned from you, is just get people in from the outside, get external opinions on it.
That's a really good way. I think that an interesting way that I used to always think about it when I was in sales as well is, whenever you're talking to somebody, their whole day includes so many different things, and your whole day includes just the thing you're talking about. So that puts it into context about how they're never going to know as much as you do about something, which is why you need to simplify it significantly and reduce that curse of knowledge. So Becca, we're talking all about the curse of knowledge. What is actually the implication if somebody falls foul of the curse of knowledge, if you like? So if a marketing team complete their messaging, they say, yep, this is absolutely right. They launch it out into the market and actually is overcomplicated. What will the impact be of that?
You're confusing, and then you're going straight back up into what we talked about, at the beginning of the podcast in point 1. I think the curse of knowledge is the number one way of confusing your message. And you'll see it because you'll lose engagement on certain posts that are too confusing, or you'll get loads of questions on the post and you'll just be like, okay, well, that's obvious, that's in their post, or it's just isn't just not doing anything for you. So that's what you'll see. You'll see a lack of engagement, or your sales team will spend a lot of their time answering questions that they shouldn't spend time answering because you've confused your audience based off your message. So there's a lot of implications about being confusing and having the curse of knowledge, because the idea of really great messaging is that you're answering the questions that your audience has and then allowing them to just ask the stuff that, the more nitty gritty stuff that only affects them. Whereas, if they're having to ask how your device works because you sent out a really confusing mode of action animation.
Or what problem it solves.
Yeah. If your marketing isn't answering what problem it solves, you're probably not getting any questions, to be honest with you.
I was thinking that as you were saying that.
You're probably not going to get anyone asking any questions. They're probably going to scroll past and be like, oh, great, another shiny device, brilliant, let's move on. But if you aren't solved the problem but not really explained how, and that your sales team are then just going to be getting loads of technical questions that really they don't want, because if the messaging was simple and done right, they wouldn't spend their time doing that. They would spend their time having really great conversations about how it really benefits the patient, how it benefits the doctor, how it benefits the hospital, and doing more of those questions that are really, helping your buyer's journey. So that's what happens when you have the curse of knowledge. Your worst case scenario, you're losing people. Best case scenario, you're confusing them, but they're staying around a little bit to ask questions. But either way, it's not how we should be putting marketing out or messaging out. And you will fall foul to it every now and again. And I think it's about constantly looking at your messaging and being like, right, can we simplify this? Are we getting tons of questions? Do we need to add a bit to the animation here or there? There's ways that if you have done it, to pull it back and change it. It's not the end of the world, but it's something that you definitely need to constantly be looking out for.
It's so important. So if you've got simple messaging and somebody knows the problem you solve, messaging can sort of extend out to other areas then as well, because somebody might know that you now solve this problem because your messaging is specific, it's clear, it's simple, it takes no brain energy to digest it. So what's the next thing that we see go wrong with messaging, Oscar?
After that, I think the next biggest thing I see is not actually answering the questions, or not answering the questions your audience are actually asking, and assuming they're asking different questions than you want to tell them, and
all the things that you want to talk about.
I think that's probably a good way to put it, that you're so focused on yourself and your product and the points you want to get across that you can't disconnect yourself from actually what your audience are asking, what they care about, what's important to them. And that's detrimental for a number of reasons. I think firstly, any question you're sidestep, anytime you're not understanding your audience, you're going to be less effective. You're not going to be, bonding with them on any kind of level. And any question that you are assuming or putting questions in front of them that is not relevant, you're going to lose attention, you're going to lose engagement, you're going to lose the potential for them to share or engage.
Well, I suppose they're just not going to move through their buyer's journtle.
That absolutely, but that's the final worst part of that outcome is that's the big thing. There's little things that lead towards that as well, though. I think if you're not fully, any question that isn't being answered, I think is a lack of an opportunity to add value to that customer. So you can add so much value. This is value that's just been left on the table, that's up for the grabs, and through a misunderstanding of your audience or assumptions on your behalf or whatever the reason is, you're not capitalizing on that free value that's there for you to take. You can be that source of knowledge for them. You can also, if you do this well and you have an effective online campaign and presence, you can really capitalize that from an SEO perspective, that you're losing out on a lot of traffic here if you're not aware of what your audience is searching online and you're not there to be the person to answer that. That's just such a significant amount of stuff you're going to lose out on, which will, you're right, eventually lead to them not being prolonged along their customer journey, because they're being confused by questions that aren't relevant, answers to questions that they didn't even ask. And that's just, you've confused them, you've lost them. That's one customer that is not converted.
Yeah, and I think whenever we think about messaging, it's all about like moving them through their buyer's journey. So, Becky, you're saying to start off with it's simple, clear messaging so you understand what problem you solve. Then actually people will have other questions. They will have other fears, concerns and issues. And that's what causes inertia in the buying cycle. Or causes it to slow down. So if we can then answer the right questions that they have and we know that, then it's going to shorten down the buyer's cycle, which is what everybody wants. You're going to have more qualified leads. You're going to shorten the sales cycle with your sales team, all these great things. There's one other thing that we do see quite a bit. And actually, this is probably, I'd say, one of the biggest things that medical device companies probably need to address. And I think the reason this is because of misunderstanding sometimes of what the purpose of a website is. And I know we're talking about messaging, but this does apply a lot to websites, applies to brochures, but it really comes down to the messaging. Becca, what am I talking about?
You are talking about including absolutely everything, even the kitchen sink in your messaging, on your website, in all of your marketing collaterals. You just don't need it. It just confuses. And I think it's really important to just put the information that your customer needs to help them through that buyer's journey. Where I see it the most is, feature dumping about your medical device and talking about every feature it possibly has. And, a large percentage of those features don't actually solve the problem that your customer is having. They are a nice addition, or they're something that every product in that, category or type has. So wasting your time talking about it just doesn't help your customer, and it just makes it noisy and messy. So I think, that's a big problem. And I mainly see it on product pages or in the like the product brochures. That's where you see it happen a lot, but it can also happen everywhere with your messaging. And it goes back to simplifying it and goes back to thinking, what is the question that they actually want solved? What is the problem they actually have? And that's what you should be talking about. And, then having, maybe not learn more, but come speak to us, and then we can tell you more about those things, because, some of the niche features that you're spending half a page talking about probably only matters for one or two people, if that.
But I think the important thing is it's all about the hook, isn't it? Because it comes back down to what's the point of your messaging. And the point of your messaging is to get people to get in contact with you. And once they get in contact, then you can address all these other things, or you can have a learning center and address loads of other things as well. But your primary message is, the whole point is to get them to engage with you as a company, and then you can move the process forward. So if you have everything, as you say, it's like, what problem are you solving for me? And actually, I've heard before, and Becca, I'm sure you've heard, and Oscar, you've heard this as well. I've heard people say to me, yeah, but I want everything on there because that will something will resonate with somebody. And I'm like, or it might resonate with nobody. And the latter is much more likely, because people are having to think too much as they're going through all this information, and they're just going to leave. We know that, I think there's stat out there at the moment that says, if you don't find the information you want on a website, how long does it take to leave?
Like a second, I think.
Well, actually, it's 10 seconds.
Okay.
But it's getting less.
I'm very impatient. I'm very impatient. I've got things to do.
Yeah. So, but that shows the importance of having all this information on your website, or all this information in your messaging. Actually, it's not really engaging your audience to make them move through the journey, or the part of the journey you want them to move through, which is to get in contact with you.
What I would say is that we are very much now talking about sort of the early messaging. So what's the first set of messaging? But that story we talked about and that clear messaging need to stay with throughout the buyer's journey. So now we're talking about, you were saying on the website, pushing people to buy or to contact. That is the initial first message that they see. But that simplicity in that story should stay through all of their messaging forever. Like, messaging is not just at the beginning of the buyer's journey, it is throughout. And I think that's something that's very easy to forget. You think, oh, well, they've contacted me now, I can now throw loads of information at them. No, the same simplicity needs to stay throughout. And that is difficult. It is difficult to work, and that it requires you to really know your customer and understand what their problems are and only address those problems.
It's a really interesting point.
It feels wrong, but it does take discipline as well. Like you want to, everything inside us wants to chuck in all the extra stuff that we can do, but it does take real strong will to actually stick to the message, stick to the story, simplify it, reduce it. It's a real difficult skill.
I think it's potentially a bit harsh, but I think it's also a bit arrogant when you throw everything at them, because it's very much like me, look at all the stuff that I do, like I'm great, like my device has this and this.
But is it, or is it actually just a lack of understanding of actually because if you really understand what your audience needs, then you are only going to give them what they need, because why would you give them anything else? So actually, everybody's really busy in today's world as well. So I think, as you said right at the beginning, it's actually really hard work to create simple messaging. So I think sometimes the easy option probably is to provide all the benefits that we offer and hope that resonates. But we know in reality that doesn't resonate. And actually you need to be really, really refined. So I think we've covered the top 5 things that we see. So if there's one thing, so if any of the listeners today are thinking, right, I know I need to sort my messaging out, because I'd probably say it's likely the number one thing that will actually make the biggest impact on companies. There's other things that they'll make a huge impact, but I think if you get your messaging right, that really will make a huge impact internally and externally. But if somebody listening to this podcast now wants to know, right, how do I really get going with this? Like what do I really need to think about? What would be the first thing you'd say, Oscar? What would be the one thing you'd say?
For me, use the tools that are available. There are tools out there that will tell you exactly what your audience want, what they need, what they're searching for. Utilize those tools and use that to inform you where to start. That's the backbone. If you're not doing that, then you're just guessing.
Becca?
Simplify your message. Just really hone it down. Take out all the fluff. Take out all of the... just take all of that out and just really think about, what problem do I solve? What one problem do I solve? And a great example of this is Amazon. We know them for one problem. They get me things quickly, and the next day, yes, they have all the other stuff that they do, but if you ask anyone what Amazon does, they will all say they get me stuff quickly, because that's their main message. So work out what your one problem is that you solve and focus just on that.
I would say, actually, and this isn't because we're an agency, because anyone listening to this podcast will know this isn't what we normally do. But actually, I think messaging can be really complicated when you're in-house doing it, because I think you're so embedded in it and it almost comes down to the curse of knowledge. So I would say if you really want to look at your messaging seriously, it could actually be a really great option to get somebody externally to come in, because they will see it at a much different level to you, and they'll be able to pick out that really simple message for you. They can't do it on their own. It's all about working with you, because you know everything better than they do. But actually that outside support can really, really help. So I think if you really want to look at your messaging for 2024 onwards, I would say actually getting somebody in to help you with that could be a really great thing.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Fab. Lovely. Well, thank you very much for watching this episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. We hope you enjoyed everything you saw, and we look forward to seeing you next week. This episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast was brought to you by Podymos. If this conversation sparked any new ideas for you, or you want to transform your medical device marketing approach, then our door is always open. Visit www.podymos.com and explore a treasure trove of information about medical device marketing on our Learning Centre. Or, better yet, get in contact with us and speak to one of our expert marketers, as they're as passionate about medical device innovation as you are.